Good evening. Welcome to Northbeat. I'm Megan Roberts. Northwest Territories fire officials say rain last night and today have helped them battle a fire burning near Fort Liard. The fire is 19 kilometers southwest of the community on the opposite side of the Liard River. An additional 20 firefighters from the Yukon are expected to arrive tonight to help out the 6 NWT fire crews on the scene. 3 helicopters are also helping battle the blaze. About 4 millimeters of rain fell in the area overnight and up to early afternoon today. A total of 7 millimeters was forecast for today. The community of Fort Liard remains under an evacuation notice. Now, despite the rain, the forecast shows warm temperatures and moderate winds over the next few days. That prompted the town of Hay River to put a fire ban in place. In Alberta, the fire threatening Fort McMurray is now considered held, and the more than 6,000 people who had to evacuate the area were allowed back home this weekend. Schools also reopened today. The wildfire alert has also ended in the county of Grand Prairie. The start of this year's wildfire season had a familiar feel. Communications went out, critical highways closed, all while communities were on high alert for fires. The NWT is already grappling with the same issues this fire season as it did last year, and it's got some people wondering if there's a better way. Canada, of course, is not the only country that deals with wildfires. The CBC's Luke Carroll looked at what Australia is doing to avoid these lapses in communication. So, Luke, tell me to start with how serious it is to have a communications outage during wildfires.
So first, let's talk about enterprise. So what happened last year was fires destroyed telecommunications equipment like the fiber line, which meant there was no phone or internet connection. And there was a wildfire moving at record speed toward that community. So I spoke with the former mayor and current councillor Michael St. Amour, who, along with council, called for an evacuation after seeing the wildfire coming.
We could see it coming from our ball field. We were having a pancake breakfast, an outdoor pancake breakfast, and I was telling the people to start packing their things and leave at that time, and that was around 11 o'clock.
So he says there was no warning from the territory. Hours later, the approaching wildfire destroyed most of the community. Now that community and most others are using Starlink to avoid a similar situation. And we got a taste of that last week with another outage across parts of the territory that led to these, lack of communications systems.
Okay, so you spoke with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation about how they would handle a situation like that where there's communication outages, which I understand would address those kinds of lapses of communication. Tell me more about what you found out.
Yeah, so one communication system that still works in these outages are crank radios and car radios. And St. Amour says one thing the territory should explore using is these radios to send messages in a situation with an outage. So that is actually what Australia does. Teresa Rockley-Hogan is an emergency broadcast lead for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation.
Emergency broadcasting is slightly different from news coverage in that we guarantee that we'll broadcast the warnings regularly, and we use the official warnings. Sometimes they're terribly written, often terribly written, because they're legal, like some legalese. So one of our jobs is to help translate.
So they have an agreement with various state and territorial governments that they broadcast notifications on wildfires or other natural disasters that could be approaching communities. And depending on the level of threat, they will repeat these warnings every 30 minutes or every 15 minutes. So they have a whole separate team from the editorial side who does this, Megan.
Could this system ever work in Canada, Luke?
Yeah, so I reached out to the territorial government to ask if they would use local radio stations for emergency broadcasts. And a spokesperson for the government said in an email that local authorities are responsible for their own communication tactics related to an emergency. So this would be in the community's emergency plan. She said that if the Territorial Emergency Management Organization is activated to respond to an event, then the tactics that are employed will be dictated by the level of severity of the event, with a focus on utilizing the GNWT website and social media site as the main source of factual information during an emergency. But evacuation orders can be sent over NWT Alert, so that pushes notifications to radio, TV, and cell phones. But if you recall, Megan, this system has been criticized for mispronouncing names and places and sometimes coming out really garbled. So take a listen to one that we had from last year.
Residents should be prepared to evacuate on short notice. Prepare to evacuate for up to 1 week. Take all medications, important documents, and prepare your pets as well. Pets should be leashed and crated whenever possible.
So a colleague of mine also reached out to the CBC and the CRTC about using the same system as Australia, but they essentially said the same thing as the territorial government, that Canada relies on its alert system.
Thanks for looking into this, Luke.
Thanks for having me, Megan.
Parts of Old Crow are still under an evacuation alert right now due to the risk of flooding, but the nature of that risk has changed. The Yukon government and Vuntut-Gwitchin First Nation say there was minor to moderate flooding over the weekend. Water levels peaked on Sunday evening and they've been dropping ever since. The Yukon government says the threat of an ice jam causing a major flood has passed, and crews are now monitoring the impacts of melting snow and ice. Residents are being asked to reduce their water use and stay away from the river for the time being. Meanwhile, the southern NWT is still grappling with drought conditions and low water levels. And this summer, the Site C Dam in northern BC is supposed to start filling its reservoir. That will affect water levels downstream in the Mackenzie River and Great Slave Lake. Ryan Connon, the NWT's hydrologist, has been crunching the numbers on that. He says the amount of water Site C can hold is equivalent to about 8.5 centimeters of Great Slave Lake. Here's what he told the CBC's Hillary Bird.
So to put that in perspective, last summer when we saw water levels drop significantly on Great Slave Lake, they dropped by about 70 centimeters. So it's roughly about 10% of that drop that we would see last summer. We'd expect to, that's about the magnitude. And that's, again, the maximum magnitude that we would see in terms of water that would not make it to Great Slave Lake. That won't be permanently taken away as we get more rainfall and snowmelt that start to move through the system. That amount of water will come back, but it would sort of be a one-time loss that we wouldn't have that water for a short period of time on Great Slave Lake. To put that into a little bit more perspective, I know a lot of people have asked me about what happened in, say, 1996 when there was a sinkhole noted on the Williston Reservoir, which is the reservoir behind Bennett Dam, and they had to repair that. When all of that water, so they had to drain about 2 meters of water, and there was a lot of discussion about how that caused increased water levels on Great Slave Lake. So the amount of water that was drained in 1996 was about 10 times more water than in the reservoir of Site C.
Low water is revealing things along Yellowknife Bay that we don't normally see. A lot of mud, a bit of garbage, and some houseboats resting in the muck. But is the low water also exposing risk we can't see, like arsenic along the shoreline? The CBC's Leanie Lambrink has been looking into this, and she joins us now with more. So Leanie, remind us why there's arsenic in Yellowknife Bay.
So mining waste was dumped into Great Slave Lake decades ago, back when Giant and Con mines were operating. There was also Giant Mine's infamous roaster, which spewed arsenic trioxide into the air for a few years. Those are some of the key ways contaminants, including arsenic, made it into the lake sediment. There are also ways it's still happening now. Baker Creek runs through the Giant Mine remediation site, and it is still carrying arsenic into the bay.
Okay, so the water levels are dropping in the lake. We know there's contaminants. Is this something people should be worried about?
So according to one researcher that I spoke to, no. Mike Palmer is a scientist with the Aurora Research Institute, and he has studied arsenic in the sediment around Great Slave Lake. We met at Rotary Park in Yellowknife, one of the places where the low water is really obvious, and he says it's fine to walk through all the mud that's been exposed there.
The sampling that we've done in shallow water areas that people would interact with through wading or swimming tends to be quite a bit lower, the levels of arsenic, than in the deep water areas. And those levels are actually close to federal and national guidelines.
Palmer says arsenic has settled into deep water areas of the bay over time. That's where you'll find it in higher concentrations, and it's not coming up to the surface of the water. But Palmer has also found the closer you get to Giant Mine, the higher the arsenic levels become.
Of course, because that's the source of the pollution. Speaking of Giant Mine, does this have any effect on the remediation project?
So keeping things wet is how some contaminated areas at the mine are actually managed. So if water levels continue to drop or certain places dry out, the project team may have to switch gears. One of those spots is a pile of tailings that were dumped into the bay decades ago. You can see it in satellite imagery from 2023. More of those tailings are exposed now because of dropping water levels.
Because they are very low risk material. They're not like the arsenic trioxide, for instance. They're a byproduct of mining that is quite benign, to be honest. So the risk, like any of our risks around the site, are as if they become airborne and there's dust associated with them. So we are currently monitoring that area to make sure it stays saturated, because it is currently saturated, although the water levels below it, it's still saturated, to monitor and make sure it doesn't become airborne. We do that with all of our tailings ponds as well.
I mentioned Baker Creek earlier. It flows through the remediation site into Yellowknife Bay. The mouth of the river used to be underwater. Now the contaminated area is more of a marsh. Plato says they're keeping an eye on this area too. If either were to dry out and become dusty, she says the remediation project would use water or product to keep the dust down. And that's important because inhaling that contaminated dust particles, those contaminated dust particles, would be unhealthy.
Okay, thanks for looking into this, Leanie.
No problem.
The iceberg business may be on the rocks in Newfoundland. The graceful giants that float down from the high Arctic are in short supply this year, and with climate change, that could be the new reality. The CBC's Peter Cowan has more on what that means for the people who come to see the icebergs and the operators who serve those visitors.
You can see lots of signs for icebergs in Twillingate, even in the local beer, but there's one place that you can't find the real thing.
We looked out the harbour, there's no icebergs here right now.
Barry Rogers is getting ready for his first tour of the season. About half of the customers at Iceberg Quest are looking for, well, icebergs, and he doesn't have any to offer.
It's a little disappointing, but I mean, we've been doing this, Peter, for a long time. And, there's no two seasons that are the same to us.
Sea ice helps protect icebergs from melting and breaking up as they float down from Greenland. But a warmer ocean meant there was less ice this year. Secor is a non-profit company that tracks icebergs for offshore oil platforms and for the Iceberg Finder website. Its data shows that over the last few decades, the amount of sea ice has been shrinking.
We're going to continue to see decreased ice cover, thinner ice, fewer icebergs. And that's something that we just have to deal with.
It's not good news for tourists like Peter Lamarck, here from the Netherlands with one goal.
Well, I'm 60 this year, so I want to see an iceberg in my life.
Alrighty, excellent. Oh, nice.
For businesses that rely on tourists, it means a pivot. Deborah Borden runs a pub, a hotel, and a restaurant. She says when her guests can't see icebergs, she encourages them to enjoy the hiking, history, or the people.
While we know that people may have some disappointment, I really truly believe that when they leave, many of them just say, hey, I'll be back, and maybe the next time we'll get to see icebergs.
It's still early in the season. A few icebergs may still float by, but for the long term, all people here can do is hope that the icebergs and the tourists keep coming. Peter Cowan, CBC News, Twillingate, Newfoundland.
Hi, I'm Abel.
I often forget to mention that he's an amputee because Abel will try any activity he can.
My arm helps me with basically everything.
He doesn't see what he can't do, he sees what he can do.
Yeah, this is helping.
The War Amps has just given him the ability to do all the activities every kid can do.
When you donate to the War Amps, you help kids like me. Thank you!
When we see Team Canada on the world stage, we're witnessing pure greatness. What we don't see is their struggle. We don't see Maggie McNeil navigating her anxiety, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander getting cut from his high school team, or Ellie Black hearing she's just too old to compete. What we don't see makes us who we are. We're all bravely facing the odds in our lives, and our bravery is our victory.
Everyone listen up.
Bursting with flavor.
All these guys 21?
Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Owning an NHL team.
Penguins had us review your offer, and it looks good.
Wow. Get me on the phone with Cops Coliseum. Tell them I want to buy it.
People in Inuvik are finding a sense of strength by learning Indigenous languages. Language classes are popping up all over the community. And for one Inuvialuit mother, it's all about connecting her children to their roots. Desloreen brings us their story.
One word a day, that's all it takes. And I think that's something that I'm really reflecting back on, incorporating language into my daily life.
Corrine Bullock started learning Inuvialuktun 6 years ago, starting with classes like the weekly ones taught here at the Inuvik Community Corporation.
I would say commitment, first of all, and consistency. Like, if you want to learn something, and it doesn't matter where we're learning or what we're learning, we have to be committed to wanting to do that.
Resources can be found at offices like the Inuvialuit Cultural Resource Center.
I've had to consciously make an effort to locate language wherever I can, and like I think anybody wanting to learn, just find a way, just like anything else, like active living or anything else you would want to reinforce in your home, like just practice it every day.
Classes in Inuvialuktun and Gwich'in are also being planned at the Inuvik Greenhouse this summer. Des Loreen, CBC News, Inuvik.
A special cross-country aviation tour kicked off in Iqaluit this morning. It's the 8th edition and the biggest one yet. Elevate Aviation is visiting 29 cities across Canada this year. Its goal is to get young people excited about a career in aviation, and it's targeting women and underrepresented groups in the industry, like Mikai Atkinson. She says she always dreamed of being a pilot when she was a little girl, and even though she changed her mind as she got older, today's event gave her a new perspective for the future.
I really like the different opportunities that we as youth, especially women and like minorities have, and all the different types of jobs there are in the aviation. They really did a good job at explaining like all how you can get there.
Melissa Haney is one of the guest speakers. She's one of the first female captains for Air Inuit. As an Inuk woman, she's hoping to be a model for youth in the community.
When we see somebody who looks like you, who is from your community or from, your group, you are able to have that role model that you're able to say, okay, I would like to be that person.
Elevate Aviation's tour continues through May 31st. And direct flights between Iqaluit and Nuuk, Greenland are starting next month. The partnership between Canadian North and Air Greenland will see flights between the two cities every Wednesday from late June until late October. And it's going to be a quick trip.
The way that this will help is what we see. There can be a time at some other places where it takes 2 days to get to your destination, but this will be convenient as you fly for less than 2 hours.
More flights could be added if there's enough demand. One-way tickets for the 2-hour flight start at $392. Cricket is growing in popularity in the Yukon, so much so that attendance at the Yukon Cricket Association's second tournament has more than doubled. For many, the game is helping to make the Yukon feel more like home. Katrin Pilkington has the story.
And swings again. While the weather was cold and rainy, the Yukon Cricket Association's annual tournament was the hottest event in Whitehorse this weekend. More than 100 people showed up, either to play or watch the event. Raman Kumar, captain of the Whitehorse Strikers, led his team to victory this year. He used to play professionally back in India. Now he's hoping to help build a competitive Yukon team.
But back in India, there is a lot of competition over there. So cricket is like hockey here in Canada.
So it's a huge sports in India. So it's really competitive over there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And are you kind of happy to see how much it's growing here in the Yukon and interest kind of growing every year?
Yeah, actually it is interesting that people are joining in and playing these kind of tournaments. It's good if we can make a cricket team of Yukon as well, Yukon itself. We can represent ourselves at the bigger level. Let's say if we can play with the other provinces as well, that'll be great help for us to grow our game as well.
This was all started by Ashik Sheikh. In the world of cricket, he's a big deal. Sheikh has helped organize tournaments for the Indian Premier League and has his own league back in Dubai. He says organizing this event is his way of giving back.
I came to Yukon, I saw boys are playing and it was like a very unstructured way. So I talked to the 2-3 boys. I said, oh, can we do it in a organized way, more organized way, so you can have a more fun on that. So 2-3 lads stepped in and then we structured the tournament, yeah.
In response to growing demand, the Yukon Cricket Association hopes to organize several more tournaments like this over the summer. Katrin Pilkington, CBC News, Whitehorse.
The Edmonton Oilers are moving on to the next round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. They beat the Vancouver Canucks in Game 7 of the second round yesterday, and they'll now face the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Final. It is a big deal for Oilers fans. The team has won 5 Stanley Cups, but it has been years, 34 to be exact. So some fans are seizing this moment and getting ready to hit the road to cheer their team on to victory. Travis McEwen met up with some of them.
For some Oilers fans, it was a late and loud Monday night, as many hit the streets in celebration of the Game 7 clinching win over the Vancouver Canucks. Outside Rogers Place, no sign of a hangover, but clear signs that the parties will continue here as the Oilers take on the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Final.
Pretty pumped up.
Dale Style is one of the Oilers' most decorated fans. Known as Banjo Guy, he's already booked his flight to Dallas and is planning to be in the arena for Games 1 and 2.
Wednesday to Sunday, we'll be there in person, costumed up. I already reached out to the American Airlines Center, or arena, or whatever it's called, just making sure we're allowed face paint. So Banjo Guy's good to go for Games 1 and 2.
Meanwhile, Sean Shahal is literally getting a new passport for the Oilers. Her fingers are crossed that she can get it expedited in time for the flight to Dallas for Game 1.
It's really nice to see your team when they're on a different arena. They like to have that support as well, and it just gives you a different outlook on how the team performed. I have a really, fingers crossed, feeling that we could go all the way, and I just want to be there to cheer them on.
Rita Brewer, wrist shot, scores! In the 90s and 2000s, the Oilers and Stars had some hard-nosed physical playoff series. Typically, the Stars came out on top, but the two teams haven't met in the playoffs for 2 decades. This could be a renewed rivalry.
It's kind of weird because you wouldn't think of the Oilers and Stars as sort of being this kind of rivalry, and I'm sure Oilers fans are probably a little bit more bitter about the Stars than the Stars are about Oilers fans, right? Because Dallas took care of the Oilers pretty handily in most of those series.
For Oilers fans who will be sticking around the city, well, there'll be chances to see the team at the fan parties outside Rogers Place and inside for the watch parties for Games 1 and 2. In Game 3, we'll return here to Edmonton on Monday. Travis McEwen, CBC News, Edmonton.
Each of the 3 territories plays host to major music festivals, and now one from each territory has been nominated for a Canadian Live Music Award. The executive and artistic director of Yellowknife's Folk on the Rocks is nominated for Festival Buyer of the Year. The Dawson City Music Festival in Yukon is up for Best Small Festival, and so is the Alienite Arts Festival in Nunavut. Alana Johnston is the festival's executive director. She says despite logistical challenges that are common in the North, they always succeed in creating a successful event.
We have to be able to problem solve on the unique situations in Nunavut, like higher airfare costs, higher food costs, and accommodations, or limited accommodations in Iqaluit. So figuring that out is always a challenge every year. But also, again, every year we're able to put on a really great festival. And I know a lot of visiting artists that come here from other parts of the world are really blown away by the 24-hour daylight. So I'm like, yes, that's on our side.
The awards ceremony is on June 4th in Toronto. And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
Hi, I'm Abel.
I often forget to mention that he's an amputee because Abel will try any activity he can.
My arm helps me with basically everything.
He doesn't see what he can't do, he sees what he can do.
Yeah, this is helping.
The War Amps has just given him the ability to do all the activities every kid can do.
When you donate to the War Amps, you help kids like me. Thank you.
When we see Maggie McNeil, she's an Olympic gold medalist gliding through the pool. What we don't see is a person who refuses to let anxiety keep her from the starting block. When we see Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, the man's unstoppable. What we don't see is a skinny kid who got cut from his high school team. We don't see Maud Sharon being forced to change weight classes after she won Olympic gold. Ellie Black hearing she's just too old to compete as she prepares for her 4th Olympic Games. Or Andre DeGrasse dealing with all the doubters, including himself. What we don't see makes these athletes who they are. What we don't see makes us all who we are. We're all bravely facing the odds in our lives, and our bravery is our victory.